How's it going, American History 2 students? This is Mr. Bell, and today we're going to be going over 4.1 notes. That's going to start with the Roaring Twenties, and this is going to be Unit 4, which is the United States between World War I and World War II, covering things like the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and the New Deal. Of course, all this will lead up to America's involvement into World War II. So, this is our first day of mandatory school with the COVID shutdown. Everything the previous 2 weeks was optional. Everything between now and May 15th, which is currently what we're scheduled to be shut down through, we'll see what, if anything, changes beyond that, is going to be required. So if you're kind of wondering how this is going to work, I'm going to take this video, the beginning of it, to explain that to you. It's not going to be that bad at all, really. I think you're going to... My goal is you'll end up doing less work, but you're still going to get the information that you would have gotten in class, because while I don't think a ton of work is going to be the best way to go here, I do think cheating you out of the content is also not good. So can I promise that doing it this way we're going to get all the way through Donald Trump? No, probably not. But could we get to Reagan? Maybe. We'll just see how this goes. So here's how I'm going to design this, and I'm going to email this to you later, and I know some of you will read that, some of you will not, but I'm going to be posting a YouTube video Monday through Thursday. Monday, and at the beginning of each YouTube video will be a warm-up, and it will kind of vary based on which day it is. So on Monday, let's use this week for example, I will cover a section of notes. So today would be 4.1 notes. That would be it for the video today. Then the next day, which would be Tuesday, I will cover a reading activity. I don't have these, I got to pull these reading activities up here. Give me 1 second. So what that means is I will have it up here. I will read through it. I have it printed off here, so I actually won't be reading from this. I'll have this up here. And this will also be posted on Canvas for you. So you're not just going to be trying to read it on this YouTube video. I know that's small print, and that's going to be a little bit difficult. So my point in trying to do this is to get out of, because I know y'all hate these, but I do think this is what you learn the most from, as far as how this applies to what's going on today, how it affected people in real life. I'm going to try to make the most out of these, and it stinks because I won't have your direct engagement. But so that will be on a Tuesday. So we're going to rotate every other day, Monday through Thursday, between notes and a reading activity. So we'd go through the reading activity, and I would tell you what questions to answer. Now, the benefit in watching the video is I may say answer questions 1, 4, and 5, whereas if you don't watch the video, you're going to need to do all of them. The expectation is you would do 1 through 5 in this case with this reading activity. So all this will be posted on Canvas. I'm going to pull up I'm going to minimize this reading activity, and I'm going to pull up Canvas here and kind of show you what I'm talking about. So for example, let me move this around a little. Here is first period, and this looks the same on all the Canvas. So Unit 4 will probably be about 2 weeks to go through, just the way we're approaching this, and me not trying to overload you with everything crazy that's going on in the world. It will have the dates that we're doing this unit through. It will have the PowerPoint, and it will have, so later on, once this video is recorded and published to YouTube, it would say Monday, today's date, 4.1 video notes. Then Tuesday, the reading activity. Then Wednesday, 4.2 video notes. And then Thursday's reading activity. So you'll be getting 4 videos a week, but only 2 required assignments a week. So that's the thing you got to remember, because the people who don't have access to the internet, unfortunately, are just getting these paper copies in the office. And while that's better than nothing, it's not going to be the same, unfortunately, for people who can't access this stuff daily. So if you are lucky enough to have access to internet, have access to YouTube at home, don't waste it. I'm not saying that I'm not going to expect you to skip over some of this stuff. I completely get it. I was a student at one time, but don't completely be dismissive of it either. So that will be kind of your weekly schedule from here on out through May 15th at least. Is Monday, notes; Tuesday, reading activity; Wednesday, notes; Thursday, reading activity. And what you will do for the reading activity, as far as, I'm going to make this screen a little bit bigger here for you guys. I had it set up for the notes, so to move it around a little. I'm going to try to pull up Google Drive here. Sorry about that. You're going to create a Google document each week. And on that Google document, this is where you're going to put the answer to all your reading activities. So I would put here, and you guys know how to use this, some of y'all better than me, Google Doc. And here's how we're going to title this. Hopefully you're watching this. So I'm going to use myself. Give me a second. Brad Bell, reading activities. And you're going to put whatever the first day of that week is. So for today, it would be 3/30/20. And everybody that's doing it online, I should get this from you. And so, for example, you would put, we're doing the Hooverville one. You could just put Hooverville, then answer the questions I tell you to answer. And then you could do that for the next one. And you'll have, so you're not going to keep a reading activity log for the entire year. You'll create a new one each week, so a new Google Doc each week for these reading activities. So you're going to have quite a few of them, but it makes it less confusing as far as what do I have from what person. So I want all these reading activities to be submitted to me from the Monday following. So today is Monday 3/30. So the 2 weeks reading activities, let me pull up the date here, would not be due until next Monday. And there's a reason for this, which would be, let me look here, we're going into April, Monday, April 6th. And there's a reason for this, because that's when students who are just picking up paperwork, that's when they go to get their new work. So I'll be getting their previous week's work from them as they pick up new work. So all these reading activities, let me pull up Canvas here. So this is a different period, but you see it all looks the same here. You have these 2 reading activities. If you want to just go ahead and do them, knock them out in one day, that's fine. And you can go ahead and share them with me. I'm not going to get mad. Now, will they be easier? Will you end up doing less work if you do them as we go and you maybe skim through the videos or even watch the entire video? Yes, that would be the preferential thing to do here. But I'm not going to tell you how to do it. It's more important that you get it done than how you get it done, because I don't want you guys to get nothing out of this time we're missing, because this is a big part. Most of you, it's your junior year, and this is just such a big part of your education, and you're going to take American History 1 and 2 in college, no matter what you're going to end up doing. So this knowledge is not a complete waste of time. It's not like a waste of time. It's not like you're going to hear this now and never hear it again. And the more I prepare you in high school, the better you'll be at it at college, whether you're going to Cleveland, Gaston, or UNC Chapel Hill, or NC State, Western, App, wherever you're going. So that's kind of how it's going to work. Again, you can submit the work as soon as you get it done. Like if for some reason today somebody wanted to knock out these 2 reading activities and submit it, that's fine, completely fine. But you have to get it done by the Monday following, which will be Monday, April 6th in the case of this. So every day I'll start out with the warm-up. I'm not asking you to keep a running tally of warm-ups here. This is just simply for, review purposes. If you hear anybody screaming in the background, it's my child. So it's hard to work from home when you have an infant and a toddler. So you guys will understand one day, hopefully not soon. But so we're going to go ahead and start today. Kind of went over the logistics. Some of y'all will get that in video. Some of y'all will probably get more out of that when I send it in email later on. And as we do, it's just like anything else. When we do this 2 weeks, you'll get the hang of it. Not just for my class, but probably all of your classes. So let's start today's lesson. I know we're 10 minutes into the video, but everyone won't be like this with me talking up front because I won't have to explain this to you. But if you do have any questions, the best way to reach me is not to call the school. Email me bsbell@clevelandcountyschools.org. So let's go over today's warm-up. This is day 136 of 180. This is our 11th day of being shut down from the coronavirus. This is Monday, 3/30/20. So we're getting toward the end of March. But March feels like it's lasted forever. Whose assassination led to the start of World War I? This is what I like here. I can fix my typos on the easily here. Whose assassination led to the start of World War I? The Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Who was the terrorist known for starting World War I? Gavrilo Princip. What terrorist group was known for starting World War I? The Black Hand. And what two countries started World War I? Serbia and Austria-Hungary. So we moved on from World War I. I think you guys understood that. It was the last thing we really covered in class. So without further ado, we're going to move on to a new unit, which I'm kind of glad. I was getting tired of reviewing stuff like populism. So let's pull up these notes. Again, you can find all these notes in Canvas as well. This is just kind of, think of this almost as your guided notes. So let me zoom in here. I know I could press that button. There. For all you tech savvy people. So this is U.S. between World War I and World War II. Couple big things happen here. You have the Roaring 20's, which is the economic boom time, followed by the greatest economic meltdown in American history. Hopefully the one we're about to have because of COVID doesn't rival it. I pray. And then you have the New Deal, which was FDR's plan to get us out of the Depression. So for today's lesson, we're going to talk about the Roaring 20's. Now, this is like a really fun lesson to teach when we're in class. And I hate that we're not in class for you guys to get the most out of it. But because it's a lot of entertainment stuff that comes out of the Roaring 20's that kind of still shape pop culture around us to this very day. So let's get into that stuff. Every group, as far as the time of their birth, is labeled within a certain generation. It's sometimes marked by a key event when one generation ends to when another generation begins. Sometimes it's just some arbitrary numbering system. So the people born between World War I and World War II are the lost generation. Just like people my age are considered millennials, and I think maybe y'all are barely considered millennial. No, y'all are actually the generation after millennials. So I think it's like there's like generation Y or Omega. Anyway, look it up. But we're talking about the lost generation. So the previous generation had been defined by war. The generation after it will be the greatest generation, will be defined by World War II. And then the generation after that still is a product of World War II because you have the baby boomers. So this one kind of is a fledgling generation here. Here's what I mean by that. They can't really find their place. There's no key event to kind of identify them by. So you have two books that really define the people of the lost generation that were really popular to the younger people as part of the lost generation. You have The Great Gatsby, which many of you may have read in English, or maybe you've seen the Leo DiCaprio, Tobey Maguire movie. And you have Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms, and I know some English teachers used to make you read that. So the one I want to focus on is Gatsby, but let's talk about Farewell to Arms. It's about the meaningless of war, especially World War I. Not much was achieved out of that. It really just set up World War II. And when you talk about an event in which 23 million people die in, and nothing really is achieved except kind of the world order is reset and almost teed up for another war, it really does feel meaningless. Now, World War II isn't meaningless. You're stopping somebody from trying to take over all of Europe and Hitler, and somebody who is trying to create a master race and who is targeting people because of their ethnicity and their religion. and you're trying to stop the Japanese and the Italians as well. The Japanese in the Pacific and the Italians who are taking over parts of Africa. More on that later. But World War I, not clearly defined. The message of the book is the only people that really get anything out of this are the leaders who are around to reap the rewards. The people who are actually the ones doing all the work, putting their lives on the line, getting injured, the people in the trenches literally in World War I, what do they have to show for it? Except for maybe some medals and some pride. The people who fought in World War I, I'm not saying they weren't prideful veterans, they were, but not in the same way that World War II would be. So let's move on to The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is one of the most famous books in the history of American literature, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So if you haven't seen the movie with Leo DiCaprio, I highly recommend it. Sometimes we would watch that in class, so if you want to watch it, it's out there. It's easy. It used to be on Netflix for the longest time. But it's an updated modern take, even though it takes place in that time period of the 20s. So I'm going to spoil a little bit of The Great Gatsby here, so if you don't want to hear it, skip ahead like 3 minutes or so. Gatsby's a guy that has everything. He has this giant house. He has a ton of wealth. He's a mysterious guy. He's a good-looking guy. The women want him, and the men want to be him. He is the envy of everybody of that time period. But inside, he's kind of a hollow man. All he really wants is the affection of this lady named Daisy, who he had fallen in love with. He had went to fight in World War I, which this book reveals and the movie reveals later on, and Daisy had married somebody else who was also very wealthy, although not as wealthy as Gatsby. So he befriends this guy. God, I can't remember the guy's name that Tobey Maguire plays in the movie. But he befriends a guy who shows him kind of what real friendship is. And the character of Tobey Maguire in this movie, I got to look up this character's name. I'm sorry. Y'all know I'm a movie person, so I'm not a English person. Tobey Maguire. Oh, sorry. What is his name? Of course. Let's see. Let's go on IMDb. I think his name's Nick. Yeah, that is his name. Now it's come to me now, but we'll just double check it here since we've looked. Oh, this is the original Great Gatsby. So you kind of see who does. He plays Nick. Okay, I don't see it on there, but I know he plays Nick because it just came to me, so I apologize for wasting your time there. Anyway, Nick befriends Gatsby, and at first Nick just wants to be around Gatsby because of his lifestyle, but then they become real friends, and it's something that Gatsby has never had because the people who are around him always just want to use him. And here's this guy, Gatsby, who has everything but real friendship and real love. Until Nick comes into his life and shows him real friendship, the other void is real love. And he wants to be with this girl, Daisy, who promises she will be with him. And in the end, that doesn't quite work out. I'm not going to spoil what happens to Gatsby and Daisy at the end of the book or the movie. But the main purpose of this story is to warn against materialism. Stuff is not everything. Stuff and money and stuff that money can buy will not fulfill you as much as love and personal relationships will. I mean, it's kind of the old cliche, money can't buy happiness, because here's the richest man in the United States in this fictional world, and he's not happy at all. So it warns against materialism, valuing stuff over people. The radio, something we're going to talk about next. Here's an old radio. My grandfather actually had one like this. Is going to be a game changer in media. You can listen to sporting events. You can listen to radio plays of things like The Lone Ranger and things like Superman. But one of the big things the radio is going to do is there's two of them. It allows the American president, later on FDR, to communicate with the American people directly during the Depression and World War II. And two, it allows advertising, which is going to change everything, and in many ways sets up the Great Depression. So the radio's still around. obviously has changed. Most people would not listen to the radio for music anymore. People listen to podcasts. People download their music. Real music aficionados listen to records. Excuse me. But the radio is a game changer. It makes people want things. And there's a difference between want and need. And that is a big factor in the Depression. So let's talk about advertising and kind of how it changes. For some things, it created a need for a product. Like you needed soap before the radio. You needed deodorant, toilet paper. God knows you need that now, before the radio. But the radio kind of makes you need a certain type. Scott's the best quality toilet paper. Dial's the best quality soap. This is what you need, because this is what celebrities use. This is what athletes use. It also then kind of evolves from advertising products that people legitimately need to advertising products that people think they need, which becomes a want. Maybe it pushes them toward getting a car when they really couldn't afford one. Maybe it pushes them toward getting a refrigerator, not because they didn't need a refrigerator, but a refrigerator they couldn't afford because an athlete like Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, somebody like that. And of course, the biggest spokesperson here as far as advertising in this time period is Babe Ruth. We're going to talk more about him in a second. But it creates a want for things, and a want for things that sometimes you need, but you don't need necessarily the top of the line. Maybe you could have got a Zenith radio, but instead you go for, I'm trying to think of a name of a radio, a Westinghouse radio, which was kind of the more top of the line. And you spend an extra $200 on it, and you really can't afford it. So what do? You either spend money out of your savings, spend money you don't have, and give up something else, or you put it on a credit card at very high interest, which credit cards become a thing that help lead toward the Depression. Now, let's move to Babe Ruth, and then I'm going to come back to advertising. So Babe Ruth is the biggest athlete of his time period. So what Michael Jordan is to the 90s, what Tom Brady kind of is to our generation, is what Babe Ruth is to the generation of the 1920s. Now, Babe Ruth and his partner in crime, Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig, of course, is a very famous player for the New York Yankees, one of the greatest players, who was unfortunately got ALS, and that became known as Lou Gehrig disease, where you lose kind of control of your muscles and things. But Babe Ruth is a brash. He's full of bravado. He is the signature athlete of his time. He's the Tiger Woods, the Michael Jordan, the Tom Brady, the Floyd Mayweather, the Steph Curry, the LeBron James, the Kobe Bryant. Whatever analogy of the it athlete of a time period is, that's what Babe Ruth is. And it's kind of unique because here's a guy who leads the MLB in home runs year after year, and batting average and things of that nature. But and for a long time he was the all-time home run leader. But he's not in that great a shape, and he's an alcoholic. And sometimes he comes to practice and he's too hungover to practice, and he's out of shape. But he could hit the ball out of the ballpark, so the coaches tolerate it. And what's really interesting is he befriends Lou Gehrig of the New York Yankees, another Hall of Fame player, and they kind of become like sugar and spice here, because Babe Ruth is, he's out trying to be with all the women that he can, going to all the bars, experimenting with drugs and things of that nature. And Lou Gehrig's a straight-laced, very religious person who is a family man through and through. So it's odd that these two different people, even though they both share a love for baseball and being on the New York Yankees, is that these two different people kind of gravitate toward each other, and they win a few world championships for the New York Yankees. Now, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig eventually end up kind of having a falling out. And the reason is because there is a time where Babe Ruth is invited to a lake house of Lou Gehrig's, and his wife's there, and Babe Ruth says something derogatory. Babe Ruth's got some random girl with him there, and the kids are playing, Lou Gehrig's kids, and it's Lou's wife and Lou Gehrig, and it's Babe Ruth and the girl that he brought. And Lou Gehrig's wife says something that the Babe doesn't agree with. He calls her something derogatory, and the two men have a falling out, and they don't speak to each other. Lou Gehrig ends up getting Lou Gehrig's, what will become known as Lou Gehrig's disease, dying. And Babe Ruth actually shows up to his funeral just drunk out of his mind, because he's drinking himself into an oblivion because of utter depression, and it's really sad. Not in great shape, but he can hit the ball out of the ballpark. What's crazy is he was originally a Boston Red Sox. They traded him to the New York Yankees, and for a long time period, almost 100 years, the Yankees won multiple World Series, 27 overall, and the Red Sox, it took them forever to win another one. That was called the Curse of the Bambino. They believe they were cursed because they traded Babe Ruth. Film. So let's go back to, before we get to film there, let's go back to advertising. There's an interesting story about the Baby Ruth candy bar and the Babe Ruth home run bar. Usually if we're in class, it'd be like, raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Baby Ruth candy bar, and everybody raises their hand. Then I'm like, raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Ruth's home run bar, and nobody raises their hand. So there's a candy bar company. God, is it Nestle? Maybe Nestle. I think it is Nestle. And they create the Baby Ruth candy bar. And everybody thinks that, of course, it's named after Babe Ruth, the biggest athlete of the time. It becomes a super popular candy. It's sold at baseball games. But Babe Ruth never gave the permission to use his namesake. So he sues, I believe it's Nestle, he sues the candy company. And the candy company comes out and says that, nope, the candy bar is not named after Babe Ruth. It's named after Warren G. Harding's granddaughter, Ruth, Baby Ruth. Of course, that was complete and utter just bull crap. But it was named after Babe Ruth. So Babe Ruth gets upset, and he demands that he be given some financial compensation, even though he doesn't need it. And he loses this battle in court. So coming out of it, he teams up with a candy company, and they create the Ruth's home run bar. It is not a good candy bar. It flops. Hence why you see Baby Ruth still in the store today and not Ruth's home run bar. And the ironic thing is, most people think that the Baby Ruth is named after Lou Gehrig. It's named after Warren G. Harding's granddaughter. Movies, something that I love and many of you love, probably watching a lot of them right now as you're staying at home. The first movies were silent movies. Charlie Chaplin is the biggest silent movie star of his time period. Very comedic actor. Obviously, he has to be a physical comedian to get anything kind of communicated without using words. So we're just talking music and actions here. And he's the biggest movie star of his time. There's actually a movie called Chaplin, in which Robert Downey Jr., aka Iron Man, plays him. So if you want to know more about him, you can check that out. The first movie that has actually people speaking, spoken dialogue, is they call those talkies, is The Jazz Singer. So usually I will show some Charlie Chaplin clips. If you're interested in him, seek out the movie and look up some YouTube videos of him. So let's go to Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh is one of the most famous people of this time period. Excuse me. So Lindbergh's known for a couple things. One is being the first person to fly by himself across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Paris. Not too many people thought he could do it. He's a stunt pilot, and Lindbergh has made a lot of money as a stunt pilot. So that's what he's really known for. The second thing he's known for is tragedy, because his daughter, after all this, is kidnapped from the crib. We'll talk about that in a second. And the third thing he's known for is just being a terrible human being, because he was very much against Jews, and he was racist and just not a good person at all. But so let's talk about Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh, the stunt pilot, famous guy, celebrity of his time. Not too many people think that he can get across the Atlantic Ocean, and he does in 33 and a half hours, which gives him the nickname Lucky Lindy. A lot of people think it's luck that he did it. In his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, he arrives to Paris, and when he does, it's like a big ticker. It's like they won the Super Bowl, even though they don't have a Super Bowl in Paris. It's this huge celebration. Then there's another one when he comes back to the United States, because it's this tremendous achievement. And kind of overnight, he becomes this. He had money, but he becomes a celebrity and makes a lot of money. And he's doing all these radio interviews, newspaper interviews. He's in the limelight. And unfortunately, people know this, that he has money, and they want to take advantage of him. So his newborn daughter is actually, I believe it's a daughter. Maybe it's a boy. I gotta look this up too. I'm sorry. I know that's off screen. Yes, okay, it is a boy. So his son is kidnapped out of the crib. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI, who we've been talking about, takes on this job personally to find the Lindbergh baby and to bring the people to justice. And of course, J. Edgar Hoover, guy that's leading the FBI, the G-Man, fingerprints, wiretapping, we know all about him. So after a couple weeks, they begin to lose all hope, and they do actually find the Lindbergh baby about a mile from Charles Lindbergh's house in the woods, dead. And J. Edgar Hoover is the one that finds the body. He brings these people to justice, and it's just another feather in J. Edgar Hoover's cap, but of course it's a tragedy. Charles Lindbergh becomes a recluse kind of after this, and most of what you hear from him later on is just negative stuff toward Jews heading into World War II. Other celebrities of this time period were actually criminals, gangsters. Excuse me. So, let's talk about some of the few famous ones here. There's Al Capone. Al Capone is someone who is the biggest criminal of his time. He's eventually thwarted by J. Edgar Hoover. Al Capone makes most of his money off of the alcohol selling it illegally after the 18th Amendment, the period of time between the 18th and the 21st Amendment called Prohibition. And actually, it's how he ends up he's arrested several times, but what does him in is he doesn't pay his taxes. And that's kind of like a trivia question. It's like, what crime was Al Capone eventually brought to justice for and, remained in prison? He was imprisoned, of course, at the famous Alcatraz prison in San Francisco. So once you have this pop-up of all these big criminals, they want a place to keep them where they can't get out, where they're isolated. That's where you get Alcatraz in the Bay Area. Al Capone's probably the most famous residence of Alcatraz, and he spends the remainder of his life there after he's arrested for not paying his taxes. But of course, it's the other things, the murder, the drug charges, that eventually end up doing him in. John Dillinger is my favorite. There's a great movie by Michael Mann, the director, called Public Enemies, that stars Christian Bale as somebody who is an FBI agent who is tracking down John Dillinger, played by Johnny Depp. He is a bank robber. He is great at hiding from the law. He can get into a bank in and out in under 3 minutes. He breaks out of jail several times, and eventually he is in he's some type of store. It was like a convenience store, a grocery store, and his face is plastered everywhere. And he was known for kind of wanting to push the envelope. Like he would go into a movie theater and watch a movie, and before the previews start, they're showing a kind of a wanted message for John Dillinger, and he'd be sitting in the crowd. That's the kind of brashness and bravado that John Dellinger had. But I have a poster of this. If we ever go back to school, you can look back on the back of the wall. And John Dellinger is actually brought to justice because a young girl, spots him and turns him into the police. I'm talking about a 5 or 6 year old girl. Hold on. My wife's looking for our daughter's bunny. I don't see it. I'm in the middle of a video. It's not in here. So, she actually turns him in, a little girl about 4 or 5 years old, and that becomes his undoing. One of the biggest drivers for all this criminal activity is the making alcohol illegal with the 18th Amendment. You have things like speakeasies pop up. Speakeasies were hidden bars, and they would be in the back of a convenience store, in the back of like a warehouse. They would sometimes be hidden in rich people's homes, underneath their homes, in their basement, and things of that nature. And you would have to know the right people, know the passcode to go into a speakeasy. We all know what bootleggers are. Being in the South, they would illegally make alcohol, most famously moonshine. And this is how NASCAR gets started, when you have bootleggers who get caught who are trying to outrun the cops, and they will get in multiple vehicles and they will try to see who can outrun the cops the fastest. Women, their roles and how they're viewed in society are changed a lot during this time, during the 20s. The kind of stay-at-home housewife that you have later in the 50s and before this is gone. Women want to dress for style. They're more provocative with the way they dress. They're more promiscuous. You see the rise of things like birth control, so contraception. So that kind of changed how some people view women, and when women speak openly about that, unfortunately, some men are not willing to hear it. You see, when I say like older men in Congress and people who view them in society, women smoke more, they drink more. I don't want to say they're less ladylike. That's not true, but the perception of what a lady was changes in the 1920s. Margaret Sanger is somebody who is one of the most polarizing and infamous figures in medical history. She coins the term birth control. A lot of people don't like this because they think that she is encouraging people to have sex outside of marriage. She's a nurse. She creates a group called Planned Parenthood, which is the first birth control clinic in America. And she is widely credited for being the one to push for legal abortion in the United States. So you can imagine how this goes over. So some very liberal people, they look back on Margaret Sanger and they like her. Very conservative people think she is the root of a bunch of baby killings. Now, Margaret Sanger was not a great person. Okay, she was racist, terrible racist. And that was one of the reasons she would push abortion sometimes more in minority communities than she would in white communities, which is just a horrendous thing to say, but it was true. So not a great person, but definitely, whether you agree for better or for worse, a very influential person. The Harlem Renaissance is kind of the awakening of African American pop culture and culture into mainstream pop culture. So you talk about poetry, you talk about music, things like jazz. These have been enjoyed among the African American community for years and years and years, but it's like all of a sudden they get a broader appeal. White Americans want to listen to jazz. They want to read people like Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes defines the Harlem Renaissance for a lot of people, that and jazz. I'm not a poet guy, so I can't go over the poems of Langston Hughes and break them down for you, but he is one of the most famous American poets. Another famous writer during this time period is Zora Neale Hurston. Now, I do know a little bit more about her works because we had to read this in college. Zora Neale Hurston wrote a book called Their Eyes Were Watching God, and it tells the story of a girl who grows up in a racist society, and how this girl does not accept what society sees her as in the South. She transcends what they see her as. She works hard, and she becomes something in the United States from the South as a young black girl from the South. And it tells the story of really her best friend growing up, but of course they use fictional names and things of that nature. Jazz, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong's trumpet guy. I'm sure you've heard some of his work. Again, YouTube some of this stuff is the stuff I would usually play in class for you guys. And these things like Langston Hughes and Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, their music is being played in the speakeasies. And it's, yes, there are predominantly black speakeasies and predominantly white speakeasies, but it's cool because you see this kind of bleeding over of culture from African American culture into mainstream pop culture for the entire United States. Marcus Garvey, he is definitely not somebody that is known for being the best person. He wanted to push for what was known as the Back to Africa movement. He didn't think that there was a chance for African Americans to be treated equally in the United States, so he would try to push them to go back to Africa, and he raised a lot of money. He went to people in African American communities, promised them a trip to Africa where they would live on a colony in harmony, and he ended up taking this money and embezzling it, so essentially just taking it for himself. He was eventually caught, arrested, and ironically deported back to Africa. But that's going to do it for section 4.1. If you have any questions, make sure you email me at bsbell@clevelandcountyschools.org. Stay safe. Thank you.